together. But I'm hoping to have a conversation around some things that you probably know already, and hopefully a couple of things that are new. We like to talk to all the new volunteers, interns, etc., to talk about, just have a common foundation and baseline about who JFS is in the community, who are refugees, who do we serve, how are we all contributing to this tapestry, if you will. So I have a PowerPoint mainly to keep myself on track. I have a tendency to veer off in a particular story or direction, so it helps keep me focused. But if you have a question or a comment or anything, feel free to interrupt me and to ask it, or I'm sure there'll be space at the end, and I'll try to pause more frequently than that. And I ask for your patience if you do know some of this content, you know, pretty well, or have a background in resettlement. If that sounds good, I'll figure out how to share my screen.
And you remember the recording, Sarah?
I did actually. We are currently recording.
Oh, we are. It doesn't tell me that.
I can't help your Zoom, but I think we are recording, or I hope we are recording. Yeah. Okay, so this is the PowerPoint presentation. I hope everybody can still see me and each other, and I hope to have some time afterwards to talk about how sort of to take this knowledge forward. But I do like to start with definitions, and I think in the era of fake news and some disinformation, I think it's always a good place to start. And so in the New American Program at Jewish Family Service, we mainly serve three groups. Those are the three groups mainly are refugees, are asylees, and those who hold a special immigrant visa. So these groups, particularly refugees and asylees, are pretty closely related. So refugees are those who fled their country due to a quote, well-founded fear. So a fear of persecution due to a number of reasons, including race, religion, nationality, political opinion, membership in a particular social group. So if you take an example, let's say an LGBT person in Uganda flees Uganda because he's being targeted by the police, because his neighbors have turned on him, because of persecution due to membership in a social group, which is LGBT status. So he flees from Uganda and crosses a border into Kenya. Crossing a border is important because if you don't cross a border and you're ping-ponging within the state that you're from, you're not a refugee. You haven't met the criteria. So you would be internally displaced within Uganda. This becomes important, especially when borders close, right? If the border to Syria closes, for example, or not to Syria, from Syria to Turkey, then a Syrian person fleeing for their life from Syria can't cross that international border, can't get refugee status, and often can't get refugee aid. And so at JFS, we serve resettled refugees, and I'm going to talk about how they actually get to us. The second group is we serve asylees. So asylum seekers in the United States have entered the United States, have applied for asylum here, meaning permanent residence here, because of the same reasons as a refugee, because they fled to the US or to somewhere else, to somewhere else, to somewhere else, to the US, because of a well-founded fear of persecution due to these same reasons. So an individual, say in Guatemala, who's persecuted, may flee here and cross into the United States and be an undocumented person. And they may apply for refugee status, for asylee status here in the United States. They wait for that decision to be made. It's often 4, 5, 6 years, longer than that even, to see whether their petition is accepted. If it is accepted, then they could come to Jewish Family Service and receive the same services and benefits as a refugee that was resettled through the State Department. An asylum seeker, somebody waiting for asylum, usually after a certain time can apply for a work permit, can apply, to have some ability to, let's say, function within our society, but is not eligible for many, many things, including welfare, including health insurance and other things, kind of a half status in the United States. And asylum seekers can have come in with many different statuses, right? Can have come in as a student, as an Olympian, as you know, as a tourist, and then when they're here, they say that the U.S. government, I can't go home because of these reasons. I need asylum, and that right to seek asylum is protected in U.S. and international law. So I think a big part of misinformation we see right now is that, you know, just deport people even though they have made an asylum claim, which isn't legal, which is why you see a lot of disinformation around the border, which is why you see lawyers being blocked from detention centers to prevent them from giving information. Why you see the border being closed is because if people come here and make a claim, then by law we have to follow our own rules. But when those folks get asylum, then they can come to Jewish Family Service for services. This isn't because of a JFS ruling or policy, it's because of funding restrictions that we have for the grants that we work under. The third category that we serve are folks who hold special immigrant visas. These are individuals from Iraq or Afghanistan who were persecuted because of their affiliation with the US government and US armed forces. So this could include folks who worked in the green zone. It could include cooks. It could include interpreters or truck drivers. But they apply through a special status, SIV status, and they actually travel directly from Iraq or Afghanistan, unlike the refugees who would be outside of their country, right, applying to come to the United States. And all of these processes, including refugee status, take a really long time. It is not an easy road. It is just about the hardest way to enter the United States is as a refugee. Are we good? I hope I didn't bore you too much with with definitions. And so this is, I always try to give a little bit of the scale of what we're talking about before we dial down into Springfield and what's happening here in Massachusetts. So this is from the UNHCR. You can see the scale of the refugee crisis that is happening currently right now. I just pulled this morning. And so you can see the differences, the nuances between asylum seekers, internally displaced people who've been ping-ponging around the country. I mean, you think of some of these countries, right, like Congo, like Syria, and we're talking about huge pieces of land. So it's not like you can just take a bus to the border and then cross and get your refugee status. You're fleeing, you're seeking relative safety, right? And sometimes you don't have the resources or the wherewithal to find a border or a safer zone. And so we're looking at 80 million people who are forcibly displaced. That's about a person a second who's being displaced. And so the work we're doing here is part of a bigger picture that has to do with providing emergency aid, providing opportunities for refugees and asylum seekers to go back home when the opportunity affords, and if it would be safe to do so. Sort of a lot of people who will be in limbo for their lifetime, for generations. So I start the presentation a little bit on a not a high point, but we'll get to sort of our work here. And so in terms of refugees, right, not just all of the displaced people, but refugees specifically, there are 26.3 million people right now who have refugee status. So the UN has examined their case and they've said, yes, you are a refugee, you're outside of your country because of these reasons. Very, very, very few of them will ever be resettled in a third country. So what what the UN, the international community looks at is really three options for a refugee, right? The first and best case scenario, and I think I haven't asked every refugee that I've met this question, but I think the ones I have agreed that The best case scenario would be to go back home. You know, if home existed, if home were safe, if home were the place that they originated from, which often isn't true after being, you know, forcibly displaced. Going home is the first and best option for people. So there are many programs to help refugees do that. If, you know, the dictator is overthrown, the war is won, like, you know, if I'm simplifying a little bit, but the second best option is for that refugee to be able to be resettled in a second country that's more nearby, that might have a more similar culture, that might have there might be a bigger community of that where they would share a language or a food group or dress, or that, you know, sort of surface level culture and deeper culture with religion and so on. And then the third and sort of least desirable option is resettlement in a third country, picking that person and family up away from everybody that they know, the language that they know often, and putting them somewhere totally and completely new. For a lot of people, this is the best option for them by far, and the only option for them. And so those are the people that the UNHCR and the US government pinpoints for resettlement into the United States. And those are the people that we serve, but the scope is much, much smaller than the bigger problem, or, you know, the bigger picture, I suppose. So in terms of I think it's good to keep in scale that most of the refugees are taken care of, are housed, are given assistance in developing countries, in countries nearby to where refugee sort of crisis zones are, or you know, wars or big conflict zones that produce refugees. Hold on just for a second. Okay, sorry about that. And so if, you know, this is a cool graphic, it's a little out of date, but the countries on the left-hand side are those but where refugees are originating from, and the countries on the right-hand side are the countries that are accepting them and providing assistance and aid and that kind of thing. And so, you know, I present sometimes at college classes, Will, you know this, and so I ask people, you know, who's taking in the most refugees, you know, and always youngsters are like, oh, the United States, we have so many, they're pouring over the border, you know, this mentality, this like we've been just kind of fed it, I suppose, by the news these days, but really that's not true. And I pulled these figures earlier today. So these are the top 5 countries, and you can see millions of people originating from these countries, and then the top 5 countries accepting or hosting refugees, though often under duress and not what the leadership of the country would like to have happen. And so this just gives some scale. It puts our place in the bigger picture. And then we can talk about the United States. So the US resettles refugees because of well, the founding of the country and our history and so on and so forth, but the refugee program didn't officially begin until the Refugee Act of 1980. Of course, communities with longer memories of history know that, you know, refugees have been coming here since you know, not the beginning of the country is a little bit much, but since the founding of the country, and has gone through many waves and many backlashes, waves of backlash and so on. So the Refugee Act says that the Department of State administers the refugee resettlement program, and that national agencies hold a cooperative agreement with the US government to resettle refugees. And so we have a national partner that works with us to resettle refugees. Our national partner is HIAS. It used to be the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. It's the oldest refugee resettlement organization in the country. Has its origins helping and resettling Jewish refugees from around the world. So the Refugee Act also says that the president sets the number of refugees admitted to the United States every year. And there's a little note that says that they are required to consult with Congress, but they're not required to do anything as a result of that consultation with Congress. So the refugee resettlement program used to be bipartisan. It used to be something where you'd explain, I would explain what I did for a living, and Republican, Democrat, people would be like, oh yeah, refugees, persecution, like, yes, good job, American, or something to that effect. And then, things have really changed. You now talk about refugees and it is very, very contentious. I go present somewhere and I want to know, I'll present anywhere, but I want to know something about the audience so I can gear information and fight disinformation and that kind of thing. So we saw a historic decline in the number of refugees admitted to the United States through the Trump administration. And so that's where you see sort of the 2016, 2017 was the last ceiling that was set by the Obama administration. When the change in administration came, I was working in Washington, D.C., and we knew that there was going to be a huge target on the refugee program because it's really easy target. The president has huge discretion, and so we saw that with the executive orders that followed the inauguration, with the Muslim ban, with looking at State Department procedures. And so though the ceiling is set this high, the numbers of refugees admitted never reached this number. And that was particularly true in 2017, when the ceiling was set pretty high by the Obama administration. The Trump administration came in with the Muslim ban, came in with the State Department regulations, came in with that kind of thing. And then we saw the numbers really tank in 2017. And the same in 2018, 2019, we haven't reached any of those ceilings in the last 4 years. A good example is this year, I believe we're up to about 2,000 or 3,000 refugees admitted since October, so in the first 7 months. And so you see the ceiling was set at 15,000 people across the entire country. If we continue at our pace, we may get to like 5,000 out of 15. So the numbers are pretty dismal, and I can talk about that. But about a couple of weeks ago now, President Biden increased that number from 15,000 to 62,500. Again, it's not a number that we probably won't. I know that we won't meet it, but it is a sign that things are changing, and the United States is looking at the refugee crisis, looking at our responsibility, looking at the origin, sort of our origin story as a country, and coming and circling back to that. And so you can see in terms of our capacity locally that it's time for us to do a huge push in terms of our community's ability to resettle and ability to welcome, because that capacity has really declined over the past 4 years just because we've had fewer people. So I think you as volunteers and our larger communities that we're all a part of, it's time to start talking. It's time to start mobilizing. And so the program that Sayonara is running, it was a pilot program, this coach program, this language coach program, to teach refugees English remotely and to help them onto their careers and learn these skills. And we had five coaches in October. And now with you all, we're going to get to 20 by May, and I hope that the program will just keep growing and keep getting more support and energy, and learn from itself and keep rolling forward. So this is the story also of the next year, is from 5 to 20 to, right, Sayonara, 40 and then 50. Keep marching forward, because I think it's hugely needed. So I get a lot of questions about how refugees get here. So I wanted to run through it quickly. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but it is really quite interesting also. So when that person, let's stick with that guy from Uganda, who was persecuted and fled to Kenya. So once in Kenya, he'll go to the UN and he'll request refugee status. And the UNHCR will interview him, will do checks, and then we'll issue him a refugee certificate, identifying him as a refugee. Usually, similar to asylum seekers here in the United States, it doesn't come with a lot of benefits or a lot of help. And so once he has that refugee certificate, because he was persecuted due to these specific reasons, membership in a social group, religious affiliation, political opinion, etc., he may be identified by the UN for resettlement in the United States. Again, looking at those priorities. Can he go home? Can he integrate into the country where he is? Or really does he need to be picked up and put somewhere else to be safe? And so you see that in terms of individuals like this person, like this fictional person I'm talking about, or you also see that in terms of groups. And so sometimes we see big groups resettle to the area. We saw a group like Nancy, you worked with the Somali Bantu refugee population, and the Somali Bantu group in Somalia were hugely persecuted due to their ethnicity and the history of the country and all of that. And so they were made a priority for resettlement because they really never were going to be able to go home. They were never going to be accepted even into the Somali community, let alone the Kenyan community or the other surrounding communities where they could flee to. And so they were allowed to resettle starting in about 2006 or so. And we have a big population here. You see that with the Bhutanese Nepali community, which is another story I could tell that I'll try to stick to my PowerPoint. This is what I meant. This is why I have the cards. And so you see this with individuals. You can also sometimes see it with groups, so though it's more rare. So once that person gets that UN certificate and may be referred to the US Refugee Resettlement Program, then they go through a process that may take up to 5, 6, 7 years or longer. So the process to get here is hugely long. They have, and anytime a life change happens, they need to restart. So if you have a baby, you restart. If you get married, you restart. So everything kind of can, if you have a medical condition like TB, something that needs to be solved, you need to get that treated, and then you need to restart. So it can take much longer if you get stuck in one of those loops. But it includes fingerprinting. It includes an interview with a Department of Homeland Security officer who travels from the United States to that country where you are, say Kenya, to do interviews. And you can imagine the impact that COVID has had on these interviews. They've been delayed, they've been canceled, and they're just restarting this summer. They also have a medical screening with a specially trained doctor-physician team from the International Organization for Migration. They also get background checked and screened to here and back by 5 national agencies: the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, and the Department of Defense. So they are the most screened individuals who come into the country whatsoever. Everybody gets this screening. There are individuals, there are populations that may be identified for further screenings. So this is what we saw with the Syrian population, particularly after the Paris attacks occurred. They put additional screening procedures in place. You definitely saw this surrounding the Muslim ban was something else, but the number of countries was expanded. And we see the individuals on hold for these extra checks fairly frequently. And so then after going through all those checks, after waiting 5, 6, 7 years or longer, then when they're approved, their name gets sent to Washington, D.C. To decide essentially where they're going to live in the country. So that I've been to the meetings in Washington, D.C. when they were actually meetings and not on Zoom. And I'm not trivializing here, but they're a little bit like the NFL draft. The names are in a list with basic information about the family, and the 9 agencies that have the contract with the State Department are around a table or around a Zoom. And the agencies know the capacity of their field offices. So they know, for example, that we have 3 staff who speak Kinyarwanda. They know that we have staff that speak Arabic. They also know that our housing isn't very conducive to individuals with mobility issues because of the stairs and the older housing stock, as opposed to a city like Tampa or something like that. They know that we can accommodate bigger families because we have bigger apartments as opposed to, you know, Oakland, California, or some urban center. So a family of 10 or 11 is okay with us here with our housing stock, but maybe you couldn't find an apartment in New York City for an affordable amount. So they know us well, and so they go through the list of these families and they choose families for Springfield. They choose families for Tampa Bay. They choose families for Oakland. And then they send me a notice and they say, hey, we chose this family for you guys. Can you serve them? And it's not, can you serve them tomorrow? It's, can you serve them tomorrow? Can you serve them in 2 weeks? Can you serve them in a year? Can you serve them in 3 years? Because we don't know when they're arriving at that point. And so I get back to them and I say, yep, looks good. You know, or I very rarely will have any issue with a case. And then that notice goes back overseas and they can continue with their processing. And then when they finally get traveling to book, I have about 2 to 3 weeks before that family arrives in the United States. And so then it's time to run. You know, you need an apartment, you need a language coach, you need you need furniture, you need items, you need to go. And so this quote kind of brings that to life for me. I mean, we're talking about people who have had years, decades, generations of flight, of moving, of seeking safety, of seeking a sense of permanence for themselves and for their family. And the goal when they get here is for them to have the place where they're going to stay, is for them to have their school, their university, their career track, their training opportunity, their a community that they can build in a permanent way, or they can move, you know, from here to a different city if they want. And so this quote brought that to life to me of like, here are your keys, it's your apartment. Yes, you do have to pay rent, but you can stay here for as long as you want. And, you know, I picked up a gentleman from Burma, kind of early on in my case management time with another agency in Baltimore, Maryland. And he was a big deal, this guy. I didn't know it at the time, but he was in charge of the servers for the Burmese resistance in Burma. And so he was followed, he was tracked by the army, right? And because he had built this genius code of some sort that I never understood, where there was a surface level website. And if you did something special that I didn't know, you could get to the back end of the website and you could report human rights abuses through this system that this gentleman created that I picked up from the airport. And his name is currently Stanley. We're still in touch. And we got him an initial job fixing the computers inside police cars. And now he's in Chicago and he's a big deal and he spoke at the UN and I mean, whatever. And I'm driving him home from the airport to a friend's house. And he's like, and it's midnight in Baltimore, you know, it's not the picture perfect, you know, we're not driving by the Statue of Liberty or anything. And he turns to me and he's like, wow, like, I think I can sleep tonight. And I'm like, I bet you can sleep. You know, you've been on a 20+ hour flight. You were in, you know, you were in the air and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, like nobody's trying to find me today. You know, of the past many, many years, like I'm like, fine. Like I can like stay here. Like I can stay here and be safe and be fine for myself and for my family. And so that is kind of the outlook that I would like you to take away from this orientation, from our work together, is that it may be frustrating sometimes, or you may not, you know, there's always in anything that we do little annoyances, you know what I mean? Like the person didn't call to cancel or, you know, something like that, or the technology isn't working, the video isn't coming on, but we're playing a part in this sort of bigger picture of this person's life. So the families that we serve here in Western Mass come from all over the world. This past year, We've had families from Ukraine and from Iraq. In the previous years, we've served many, many more people from many more places, notably those from Afghanistan, Eritrea. Oh, I have Afghan on here twice, and every volunteer orientation I catch it, and I never have fixed it. And we serve Syrians and individuals from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so these are all people that you might encounter volunteering with us, or you might ever just meet one family if that's the shoe that fits. So I want to describe the initial assistance, and I'm going to end the presentation with some pictures to kind of bring you back to life after I've been talking at you for an hour or so. So the U.S. federal government does pass through some assistance to us to help set up the family. This assistance is pretty limited. So we have about $1,100 per person to spend on that person. So this is not like keeping the lights on at JFS. This is direct assistance for each refugee. And so let's say it's a family of 4, very reasonable family size. So I have $4,400 to rent an apartment, to pay for the first month, last month, and security deposit, to furnish that apartment, to pay for food until we can get food assistance for that person, to pay for all of their initial housing things like a toothbrush, a towel, a bath mat, a shower curtain, pots and pans, spoons and knives, all of that. And to, provide bus passes. Now in the land of remote everything, you want to think technology. So think about Wi-Fi, think about a Chromebook, and that kind of thing. So you can imagine how quickly, if we're not smart, that money flees the agency, because an apartment for a family of 4, you want a couple of bedrooms, is going to be $1,100, $1,200, $1,100 maybe if we're being thrifty. And so first, last, and security, that's $3,300 out of $4,400 that's out the door before the family ever sets foot in Springfield. And so we have a huge donation area. We try to be super, super smart with partnerships, with partnering with congregations or with churches or with a book club. I'll partner with anybody to help refugees get their foot in the door and sort of start it off well. And then in the first 3 months, a number of you mentioned traveling. A lot of this is what you would imagine you would need if you traveled to a new country, right? And so being picked up at the airport, obviously, being helped to get medical care, to get food and cash assistance, to enroll children in school, to enroll in English language help, like you will be helping with as a language coach, perhaps. And helping to find a job. So all of this is kind of common sense. But the US government, because it's a little bit the US government, make sure it's regimented and recorded in a certain way and in a certain time frame, which keeps us accountable. After that first month, it gets really fun because you get to layer on these different programs to help have a family start out right. And so at JFS, we have about 50 employees and we have about 35 or more working full-time to help new Americans. And so that crosses behavioral health to the New American grant programs, includes employment services, includes intensive case management for folks with medical issues, includes citizenship, green card, family reunification assistance, particular specialized help for elders, for kids in school, for kids before school. So we have all of these different grants and we try to layer them together in some sensible way to provide for wraparound care and help and support and connections for each particular household. I should mention that that Jewish Family Service doesn't only have a New American program, we also have some other programs. So we have more mainstream outpatient therapy services for community members. We have a small Jewish Life program that has Jewish enrichment programs primarily in the Upper Valley, but also from the Jewish Community Center. And we have a small but powerful adult guardianship program that helps elders or others who are taken advantage of by their family or manipulated, and they're assigned to Jewish Family Service by the court. And so we are with them and act as their guardian or conservator until they pass away. So that's small but powerful sort of branch of JFS. I'm going to pause for a breath before I get to my more fun picture portion and see if there are any comments or questions or thoughts while I take a sip of tea.
Well, it's sort of like a personal question because of the person that I'm going to be working with. But what determines, like, somebody comes, but let's say their wife and kids are still left in the country, and how is that determination made, and what's that based on, and
Absolutely.
so forth?
That's a really good question, and we see it a lot actually with families for a number of reasons. I think the most common reason is that when you're fleeing somewhere, sometimes you flee in different directions to different places, and so very often, or the timing is off. Like one person goes first, to make money, to set things up, to make sure it's okay, and then essentially sends for the remaining members of their family, for lack of a better sort of articulation of that. And so then if you're applying for refugee status, sometimes the one person opens a case sooner than the rest of the family. And so that first person may get through the processing quicker, partially because there are fewer people and fewer logistics and all of that. And so the other person, when they come to the camp, they may be in the registration process and kind of just getting started, while one person is exiting and departing for the United States. Okay. And there's very the messaging to people isn't as accurate as I wish it were, in terms of, oh yeah, you go, they'll be right behind you. And then we get people here who are like, oh, my family, they're right behind me. And, we don't know when they're, the process does take a long time, and they can encounter setbacks as well. There are a few avenues to apply for family to come and join in family reunification, both through the USCIS, the immigration system, and through refugee resettlement. But again, both of them take, it's a matter of years, not months. And so, if you do encounter somebody who they don't think that they've applied for their family to come and join them, that would be an email to Sayonara or I quickly, because we want to, some of them are time bound. And so we want to make sure to hit that. But it is very, very frequent. I mean, we've also had cases of parents not knowing where their children are. It's the nature sometimes of this flight. And so there are programs through the Red Cross and through other places to help parents and other siblings find where their family ended up, in which camp, in which place. I think the internet, I think Facebook has helped with that a lot, just by its nature. But yeah, especially with the processing to get here. I once resettled. I was the case manager for a woman who came, and she was pregnant when she arrived, and her husband was back in Burma. And he had been coerced into participating in a work camp of sorts for a terrorist organization. And so he was brutally honest on his application to come to the United States and said that he had worked for this organization, which was blacklisted by the United States government. And so his application was denied to come to the United States, and hers was approved. And so they had to make the decision, knowing that he would never be able to resettle in the United States, whether she would still go or not. And so, there are real decisions. And I think some of that conversation also happens with people who precede their spouses and their children to a refugee camp or to a location. Like, should I go, or should we combine our cases and I wait here for years? And it's the same mentality, like, oh, I'll go, I'll set myself up there, I'll send back money, and then when you come, like, things will be better, is kind of what I think can happen. But those are good. I mean, those are good cases where the family is surviving, the family is out there, and hopefully in the process to resettle. Any other thoughts or questions?
Why is there a distinction made between asylum seekers and refugees?
I think it's just a timing. You mean in the in some ways it's a timing issue, like that person in Kenya waiting for their refugee status, their refugee approval to come to the United States is kind of similar to an asylum seeker, just in a different location. And so that person is approved for refugee status and they come to the United States, just as a person who is in the United States waiting for their asylum decision is waiting for their asylee status. And so they're just different words, I think, to be convenient for the US government, so that they can, you know, if it's a refugee, then they had their status before they get here. If it's an asylee, then they were processed while waiting in the United States. But the result is the same benefit, is the same status. You know, I look at an asylee and what programs they can enroll in, and a refugee, and it's nearly the same. The only challenge that I have is that refugees, they all are assigned a refugee resettlement agency. Every single one of them comes into a door of some place, hopefully like Jewish Family Service. But asylees, because they're here, they're working with pro bono lawyers, they're working with legal aid, they're working with a private lawyer to help push their, or they're representing themselves. They never find out about a resettlement agency and about the programs that they can take advantage of. And so it's a big outreach concern for me, and a priority. You know, that's a next year project for me, because we need to reach out to those lawyers. You know, we need to get into people's heads so that when an asylum approval notice is issued, there's also a directive to go walk into a place like JFS, which for a population who's been encouraged to be invisible is often something that's hard to encourage them to go to a place to identify themselves in order to get services. Like I have a phone number right now for a Haitian family in West Springfield. And I know that if they came to us, we would help them get cash assistance, they could get medical benefits, they could get food stamps, and they won't pick up the phone. They get, we text, we do, you know, we've been trying to be in touch with them, but there's a significant amount of fear in communities for getting a phone call and having it be a trap. And so that's a challenge on our end, because there are, I think, in the US, of the asylum decisions, only 5% of people who are asylees walk into an agency and get help. 5% out of the 100% of people who get their asylum approval. Not 100% of asylum seekers are approved, but of those who get their approval, only 5% seek refugee resettlement services, which is remarkable. It's remarkably low. So anyway, I think it's a little convenience in the, you know, picking the lane, but the reasons why somebody is persecuted, the legal definition in US international law is the same. Anything else before I go on to the more fun picture portion? Well, I'll go, you can interrupt me. So I wanted to show a little, because everything's remote and we're not together and you can't see Jewish family and all of that. Not that, I mean, it's a little bit like a sardine can, if you can imagine, in that we're all in there together and so on. I thought I'd show some pictures to represent some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that we're facing these days at JFS. So this is our most recent family from Ukraine that was resettled this past fall. And just a few things to highlight. We have this family, a large family, and the family came into the United States in October, remote learning, or September, October, around there, November actually. Remote learning was taking place, so the kids never set foot in school. So their first experience in the United States in school was remote learning, hugely challenging with a family with limited English. And a huge digital literacy gap for all of our families. So this family, when they came in, we purchased them 5 Chromebooks, we purchased them a Wi-Fi hotspot. They had a language coach matched with them to start learning English, but without that face-to-face contact, without getting out in the community, without practicing these skills, it's challenging to keep them in your brain and get going with them, get going with your new life. Same with employment opportunities, same with training facilities. You know, the deck is a little bit stacked against people, everybody during COVID-19 and the pandemic, but it layers additional challenges on resettlement providers, on volunteers, on each other. So, and on, you know, staff in places with masks. A couple happier photos. We've tried to be hugely creative, and I know I'm sure Sayonara would say that our volunteers have also been hugely creative during this time. So on the left are a few young women from Iran and Afghanistan who work at McDonald's. So we have pandemic workers from Walmart to McDonald's to Stop and Shop to office furniture construction to you know, many other places, essential workers out there. And we've tried to be creative in terms of our youth programs and our elderly service programs. So on the right is a Camp in the Box program that we did last summer because all summer programs were canceled. We drove out to families and we provided a kit with a translated guide of activities they could do straight for 8 weeks during the summer. And we have, of course, turned to Zoom and remote programming. So this is a parenting workshop that just concluded in March. And so we met on Zoom for 2 hours every Saturday for 9 weeks, had excellent participation. We were in the home teaching folks how to use Zoom. We were troubleshooting internet connectivity, you know, the camera and all of that with folks. And we had 2 remote facilitators who Zoomed in from Maryland, who were refugees themselves. And then we have the upper right, our staff Fikiri, who is a community organizer and a natural leader, who was an interpreter and facilitator. And I'm also there, but I'm there as a cheerleader. This was their graduation day, and I was trying to wrangle them into taking a graduation picture over Zoom. So we did give each person a graduation certificate in the office and a gift card and a congratulations and a graduation picture as well. So we're trying to do the hybrid as much as possible. This is our staff. We got a donation of knitted hats at one point, so we had to try them on before we gave them out. And so you can see that our staff really represents the individuals who have passed through our office and who need services themselves. So, you know, from left to right, we have El Mustafa, who's from Morocco, Adan, who's from Somalia, Mandosh, who's from Nepal, Ekamwe, who's from Thailand, Tatiana, who's from the former Soviet Union. We have Manju, who's also from Bhutan, and Linda and Rose, who are from Rwanda. Durga is from Nepal, and Maxine, our CEO, is from here. So this is really a good sample of our staff and the energy and love that I think we bring to this work. And it's been also a very hard year getting everybody online, getting everybody on whatever platform we're using at that moment, and for them to get their clients doing the same. It's been really isolating and really challenging, but I feel really proud of our response and of our optimism, I think, going forward. And just see that more and more as we look to growing the resettlement program and kind of testing the boundaries of bringing the strengths. I'm trying to find the very most silver lining of the pandemic and what we've learned in our digital online presence and bring that into a sort of future of programming. This is, that was our nice office. This is our underbelly of our office. So this is our basement, just pointing to the opportunities and the challenges of getting sometimes shoes that are too big, size 15 basketball shoes, and trying to get some community help, both to give items to newcomers. We can furnish about 5 apartments, I think, from our in-kind donation space under the office. But we need to organize it, and we need to get organized, and that poses a huge challenge for staff that are strapped. So we have a wide variety of ways to engage with JFS, and we've had awesome team of high schoolers who have come in throughout the pandemic to organize and to get us organized for increased resettlement starting this summer. So it's a little bit more tame than what you see in the pictures, but just as fun down there. And then this is a picture with some of our Somali refugees that were resettled more than 10, 12 years ago. And so the adjustment, what you needed when you first came in may have been met, but then families grow and then you have kids and you need to learn how to install car seats. And so JFS doesn't kind of just move on and serve the newcomers and only find housing. We try to reconnect with communities who are already here and meet emerging needs. So this was a partnership with Bay State Medical Center, with a fire department in Connecticut who's very active in car seat education, and with Toyota, I believe, to provide 30 car seats to Somali families and educate them on car seats. So kind of looking for those opportunities. And I think, especially now, but resettlement in a way is a partnership game. So a lot of what Sayonara does is search actively for different partnerships and kind of find out how we can mutually benefit each other. This is Alex from RAD Springfield. RAD is a bike advocacy and accessibility organization, and they are awesome. They're part of the Make It space in Springfield, and they provide bikes free of charge and a lock and a light and a helmet to our clients who have gotten a job or a training opportunity. So this is a former client who got a job, and he's now a STIC student, and he was getting his bicycle from RAD. So another great partnership is with Gardening the Community, providing farm shares to refugee elders and families. So we're moving on that now. We have kids attending the Jewish Community Center's summer camp. And this was a couple of years ago. Again, summer was canceled last year. I think we can all admit it was a wash. And so we're gearing up for this year's camp, but trying to find ways where new American families can plug into really dynamic services in our community. And this is our youngsters waiting to go to camp outside of our office, being like, okay, lady with a camera, but can you drive us to the swimming pool, please? And this is them inside before they were brought out to the van. And so you can see a little bit of our waiting room. You can be a little bit in the feel of the office, and kind of the kids of the families that you may be working with. And really to bring it back to the contribution of volunteers is huge, 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 huge. We have a dynamic team of interns. We have a really phenomenal cast of characters who are supporting our newcomer families. From Carolyn, who drove this newcomer to summer camp every day when summer camp occurred, to camp at 8, back from camp at 4. For an entire summer, treating her like her grandchild who had also gone to the JCC, to language coaches pitching in, to youth mentors who are guiding young people through decisions after high school and college and how to approach their futures, to our basement volunteers who are edging every day the chaos back a little bit, and getting ready for hopefully the family that's coming in around the corner. And this is one of our youth mentors with her young person who graduated high school last year. I can say in large part due to the advocacy and the help that this mentor gave her and the resources that she was connected with when learning went remote, and the youngster did not thrive in remote learning, and is very much thriving now. And so I can end the presentation with a cookie. Never hurts. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us and for getting on board and for working out the kinks, which always happen when meeting a new friend or a new mentee or a new learner, and kind of chipping in with us in this year, which is following kind of a a down year, I think we can all agree. So I'll pause there and see if you have any questions, and I hope whoever is going to be watching this online will also feel free to email me or reach out with questions, who might be watching the recording. So do you have any thoughts or reflections or questions? As cute as she is, I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can chat a little bit. Stop share. Okay, now I don't need a script anymore, so we can